My wife joked loudly, "Stop acting, we're not married." Laughter filled the room, but months later, she realized I'd be the one laughing last. The words hit me like ice water while I stood by the poolside bar at my company's annual retreat in the Hamptons, champagne glass halfway to my lips. I just mentioned to my colleague Marcus that Jessica and I had dinner reservations at 7, something any normal husband might say, when she cut through our conversation like a knife through silk. "Stop pretending we're married, Tyler." Her voice carried across the entire gathering of executives and their spouses, drawing every eye in our direction. "We both know this is just for appearances." The laughter that followed wasn't the good-natured kind you hear at genuine jokes. It was the uncomfortable, voyeuristic laughter of people watching someone get publicly humiliated, the kind that makes your skin crawl because you know you're witnessing something deeply personal being turned into entertainment. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching my wife of 3 years smile at the crowd like she'd just delivered the punchline of the century, while conversations died and heads turned toward us with barely concealed fascination. My boss, David Chen, raised his eyebrows and took a long sip of his scotch, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama unfolding at his carefully orchestrated corporate event. "Well," I said, setting my champagne down with deliberate calm, "I guess you're absolutely right. We're not married." The laughter stopped abruptly. Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment, probably expecting me to stammer out some embarrassed explanation or beg her to stop making a scene like I usually did. Instead, I straightened my tie and looked directly at her. "Thanks for clearing that up in front of everyone. Really saved me some awkward conversations later." I turned to David and extended my hand. "Thank you for a lovely evening. The catered shrimp was exceptional, and the view of the Sound is spectacular. I'll see you Monday morning for the Morrison presentation." Then I walked away, leaving Jessica standing by the pool with her mouth slightly open, surrounded by a crowd that had suddenly found their drinks very interesting. I could feel every pair of eyes tracking my movement as I made my way through the French doors, across the marble foyer, and out to where my Tesla was parked in the circular drive. For once in our relationship, I wasn't the one apologizing, explaining, or trying to smooth things over. I was done being the husband who bent over backwards to accommodate someone who clearly didn't want to be married to me. The drive back to Manhattan gave me 2 hours to think, and by the time I pulled into our building's underground garage, I had absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. I spent Saturday morning in our Manhattan penthouse, systematically planning my next moves while Jessica enjoyed her newfound freedom at the Hamptons retreat. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd chosen to stay another night with colleagues rather than come home to address what she'd said, which told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. I started with the practical considerations first, calling my Harvard Law School friend Robert Morrison, who ran a boutique firm specializing in complex divorces for high-net-worth individuals. "Tyler," he said after I explained the situation, "I need you to document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every text, every financial transaction. If she's been living a separate life, we need proof." His tone was professional but sympathetic. "Based on what you're telling me, this sounds like abandonment of marital duties, which works in your favor given your prenup." The prenuptial agreement Jessica had signed 3 years ago suddenly felt like the smartest investment I'd ever made, though at the time she'd laughed it off as just paperwork rich people do. I scheduled a consultation with a private investigator Robert recommended, someone discreet who specialized in matrimonial cases involving potential infidelity. Most spouses who publicly declare they're not married have been planning their exit strategy longer than their partners realize, he explained during our phone call. They're usually just waiting for the right moment to make it official. As I sat in my home office reviewing our joint accounts and credit card statements, I began noticing patterns I'd been too trusting to see before. Jessica's girls' nights, that lasted until dawn, had become increasingly frequent, often coinciding with business trips to cities where I later discovered she had no actual business meetings. She'd opened a separate Instagram account I wasn't allowed to follow, claiming it was for personal growth and professional networking. Her explanations for expensive purchases had become more creative and less believable, and she'd started receiving packages addressed to her maiden name. I realized she'd been methodically creating distance between us for months, treating our marriage like a business arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. The weekend retreat wasn't when she decided we weren't really married, it was just when she finally announced it publicly. I decided to give her exactly what she'd been working toward, but on my terms and timeline, not hers. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a corporate merger, and I implemented my plan while Jessica extended her Hamptons weekend indefinitely, posting Instagram stories about living authentically and embracing freedom. I contacted Sterling Moving Services, Manhattan's most professional relocation company, and arranged for them to pack Jessica's belongings with museum-quality care while she was away. Every designer dress, every piece of jewelry, every expensive handbag she'd accumulated during our marriage was carefully cataloged and wrapped like precious artifacts. I changed the security codes on our penthouse, removed her keycard access, and contacted building management to inform them that Ms. Jessica Chin no longer resided in Unit 47B. The irony of using her maiden name wasn't lost on me. She'd been receiving mail under that name for months anyway. While the movers worked with professional efficiency, I discovered Jessica's hidden credit cards tucked inside a Hermes bag, along with a second iPhone I'd never seen before. The phone was locked, but the credit card statements told a fascinating story of restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in cities where she'd claimed to be working, and charges for two people when she'd supposedly been traveling alone for business. I had the movers arrange her belongings in the building's marble lobby with the same care they'd use for a high-end boutique display, ensuring everything looked expensive and deliberate rather than vindictive. The doorman, Charles, had been with the building for 15 years and understood discretion, but I made sure he documented everything with photos for building security purposes. "Mr. Richardson," he said, adjusting his white gloves as he surveyed the designer luggage and wardrobe boxes, "should I expect Ms. Chin to collect these items soon?" "I imagine she'll be by to pick them up once she realizes they're here," I replied, handing him an envelope containing building management's official notice of her status change. "She's been very busy with her authentic living and freedom embracing lately." I spent the afternoon at my office, focusing on the Morrison presentation and letting my assistant field any calls from Jessica's number, which remained blissfully silent until nearly evening. My private investigator called with preliminary findings that confirmed what I'd suspected. Jessica had been photographed multiple times with Brandon Walsh, the startup CEO she'd mentioned casually in conversations over recent months, always describing him as just a business contact who understood her entrepreneurial ambitions. The photos showed them looking very much like a couple enjoying romantic dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekend getaways to Martha's Vineyard, and business meetings that lasted suspiciously late into the night at his Tribeca loft. Tuesday morning brought the legal artillery, as Robert's firm filed divorce papers citing Jessica's public abandonment of marital duties and documented separate lifestyle, exactly 72 hours after her Hamptons declaration. I had breakfast with Patricia Wells, Manhattan's most ruthless divorce attorney, who reviewed the preliminary evidence with the enthusiasm of a shark detecting blood in the water. "Your wife made this remarkably easy," Patricia said, spreading the private investigator's photographs across her mahogany conference table like playing cards. Public declaration of non-marriage witnessed by dozens of colleagues, documented infidelity, separate financial accounts, and a prenuptial agreement that protects your consulting firm and family inheritance. The evidence was overwhelming and methodical. Brandon Walsh turned out to be more than just Jessica's secret romantic interest. They'd been planning a joint business venture, some kind of luxury lifestyle consulting firm that would cater to wealthy clients looking to optimize their personal brands. Jessica had been using our joint accounts to fund market research and business development, essentially making me an unwitting investor in her exit strategy. "She's been planning this for at least 8 months, Patricia explained, reviewing bank statements and credit card records. The separate phone, the business meetings, the weekend trips, this wasn't spontaneous passion. This was calculated preparation for her new life. The prenuptial agreement Jessica had dismissed as paranoid rich person nonsense now stood between her and half of everything I'd built. My tech consulting firm, which I'd grown from a one-person operation to a team of 12 specialists, remained entirely mine. The family money I'd inherited from my grandfather's textile business was protected. Even our penthouse, which I'd purchased before our marriage, couldn't be touched. Robert's team had already served papers to Brandon Walsh's business attorney, informing him that his client was now involved in litigation that could affect any joint ventures with Jessica. Most affair partners disappear quickly once they realize they might face legal scrutiny, Patricia noted with professional satisfaction. Especially when there are business interests at stake that could be compromised by association with matrimonial fraud. Security footage from the Hamptons retreat was subpoenaed, capturing not just Jessica's public declaration but also her interactions with colleagues throughout the weekend, including several conversations where she'd explicitly stated that marriage was an outdated institution and that she was finally ready to live as a free woman. Wednesday evening brought Jessica's dramatic return to Manhattan, and I watched from my penthouse window as her Uber pulled up to our building's entrance at exactly 6:47 p.m. She stepped out with the confident stride of someone expecting to waltz back into her old life, designer luggage in hand, probably planning to laugh off her Hamptons comments as too much champagne and stress. I watched her approach the entrance, swipe her keycard, and pause when nothing happened. She tried again, then looked up at Charles with obvious confusion. From 47 floors above, I couldn't hear the conversation, but her body language told the entire story as Charles gestured toward the marble lobby where her belongings were displayed like an expensive estate sale. The elevator to our floor never arrived for her because she was no longer authorized to access it, and I watched her pace back and forth in front of the building for 20 minutes, alternating between frantic phone calls and increasingly animated conversations with Charles. When I finally descended to the lobby, Jessica was standing amid her designer belongings like a queen surveying her displaced kingdom, her face cycling through emotions faster than a slot machine. "Tyler, what the hell is this?" Her voice carried that dangerous edge I'd learned to recognize over 3 years of marriage. "This is you getting exactly what you announced you wanted at the company retreat," I replied calmly, noting how Charles had positioned himself strategically near his security phone. "You declared publicly that we're not married. I'm simply making the legal reality match your public statements. That was just a joke. Everyone knew I was just being dramatic." She gestured wildly at the assembled luggage and boxes. "You can't seriously think I meant that literally. I have 37 witnesses who heard you say we're not married, including my boss, 3 VPs, and 2 board members. The security footage shows you laughing about it afterwards and telling multiple people that marriage is outdated." I pulled out my phone and showed her the divorce papers Patricia had emailed me. "Congratulations, you're about to get everything you've been working toward for the past 8 months. The color drained from her face as she read the legal documents, her eyes widening when she saw Brandon Walsh's name listed as a correspondent. "How do you know about Brandon?" "He's just a business contact." "Really?" "Because my private investigator has some fascinating photos of your business meetings. Apparently you two do very intimate market research." Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, probably realizing for the first time that her secret relationship wasn't nearly as secret as she'd thought. "You hired a private investigator? That's psychotic." "I hired professionals to document the truth, which is that you've been planning your exit strategy for months while using our joint accounts to fund your new business venture with your boyfriend." The next morning brought Jessica's full-scale emotional warfare campaign, starting with her mother calling my office at 8:15 a.m. with the kind of fury only wealthy socialites can muster when their daughter's meal tickets are threatened. "Tyler Richardson, you will stop this nonsense immediately," Margaret demanded through my assistant speakerphone. "Jessica made a foolish comment after too much wine, and you're destroying a marriage over nothing." I took the call in my conference room, surrounded by quarterly reports that suddenly seemed refreshingly straightforward compared to family drama. "Mrs. Chin, Jessica didn't just make a comment. She's been systematically planning to leave our marriage while using our joint resources to fund her affair and new business venture." "Affair? Don't be ridiculous. Jessica would never. I have photographs, credit card records, and witness statements. Your daughter has been very busy building her new life while pretending to be married to me." The conversation devolved into threats about Margaret using her connections to damage my consulting business and social standing in Manhattan's elite circles, which would have been intimidating if I hadn't anticipated exactly this response. By noon, Jessica had recruited our entire social circle into her campaign, with friends texting me variations of, "She's really sorry," and "Everyone makes mistakes," and "She just needs space to process." I responded to each message with the same professional courtesy I'd use with clients. "I appreciate your concern, but this is a legal matter now." The most entertaining call came from Jessica's college roommate Ashley, who tried the guilt approach. "Tyler, you two were so happy together. Can't you forgive one mistake?" Ashley, adultery isn't a mistake. It's a series of calculated decisions made over months. And publicly humiliating your spouse in front of their colleagues isn't an accident, it's a choice. Jessica herself showed up at my office building Thursday evening, creating a scene in the lobby that had security guards stepping in when she started raising her voice about cruel and unusual punishment for what she kept calling one tiny mistake. I watched from the 23rd floor as she paced outside on the sidewalk, probably hoping I'd come down to rescue her like I always had before. When I didn't appear, she resorted to sending a series of increasingly desperate text messages. "I'll do anything to fix this. I'll cut off all contact with Brandon. I'll quit my job and focus on our marriage. Please just talk to me." But the most revealing message came at 2:17 a.m. "You don't understand what you're throwing away. Do you know how many men would kill to have a wife like me? You're making the biggest mistake of your life." Even in crisis, she couldn't resist reminding me how lucky I should feel to be with her, which perfectly captured why we were getting divorced in the first place. 6 months later, I was standing in the ballroom of the Metropolitan Club, watching Jessica weave between tables at a charity gala with a silver tray of champagne flutes, her designer dress replaced by the black uniform of event staff. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. The woman who had once attended these events as my wife, complaining about boring conversation and overpriced charity auctions, was now serving drinks to the same crowd she'd once considered herself part of. My consulting firm had expanded internationally after several high-profile clients were impressed by how decisively I'd handled what they diplomatically called personal restructuring, which apparently translated to trustworthiness in business dealings. I just signed a contract with a London-based investment group that would triple our European operations, and the celebration had brought me to this gala as a guest speaker about crisis management and strategic decision-making. Dr. Amanda Price stood beside me, radiant in navy silk, discussing her latest research in cardiac surgery with the kind of passion Jessica had never shown for anything except shopping and social media. Amanda appreciated intelligence, valued hard work, and had built her own successful career saving lives rather than expecting someone else to fund her lifestyle. The contrast was so stark it felt like comparing daylight to shadow. I'd met Amanda 3 months earlier at a medical technology conference where my firm was consulting on data security systems, and she'd impressed me immediately with her quick grasp of complex technical concepts and her genuine curiosity about how our systems could improve patient outcomes. "Tyler," she said, squeezing my arm gently, "isn't that your ex-wife?" I followed her gaze to where Jessica was attempting to serve champagne to a table of pharmaceutical executives, clearly struggling with the weight of the tray and looking increasingly flustered as one of them waved her away impatiently. "Yes, that's Jessica. She's working as event staff now." The transformation was remarkable and sobering. Jessica's startup venture with Brandon had collapsed spectacularly when investors discovered the ethical issues surrounding their relationship's origins and her use of marital funds to bootstrap their business without proper disclosure. Brandon had disappeared faster than Patricia Wells had predicted, leaving Jessica to face both the business failure and the social ostracism that came with being exposed as an adulteress in Manhattan's tight-knit professional circles. Her career in luxury real estate had evaporated when word spread about the divorce proceedings and the circumstances behind them. Wealthy clients tended to avoid agents with messy personal lives and questionable judgment about financial boundaries. "She looks miserable," Amanda observed with the clinical assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating human suffering. "Success and failure both have consequences," I replied, watching Jessica nearly stumble as she maneuvered around a crowded table. She chose her path thinking it led somewhere better, and now she's learning what that destination actually looks like. The final twist of vindication came when my private investigator's final report revealed that I'd been documenting Jessica's behavior for over a year before the Hamptons incident, having suspected her infidelity much longer than she realized. Her public declaration of non-marriage hadn't been the beginning of her betrayal, it had been the perfect legal trap she'd walked into willingly, giving me everything I needed to protect myself while she destroyed her own credibility. Amanda and I left the gala early, planning a quiet dinner and discussing our upcoming weekend trip to her family's house in Connecticut. As we waited for the valet to bring our car, I caught one last glimpse of Jessica through the window, cleaning up spilled champagne from the marble floor while guests stepped around her like she was invisible. The woman who had once told me I should feel lucky to have her was now hoping someone might tip her well enough to make rent on whatever small apartment she could afford. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well and letting other people's choices catch up with them.